What if I gave you a little bar graph that could tell you exactly how much freedom you have at any moment? You could do things that would increase the amount of freedom that you'd have, and if you wanted to spend your freedom, the bar would decrease and would show you how much freedom you have effectively left after that you used your freedom. If you ever emptied your bar graph, you would still have some amount of freedom, but not nearly the amount that you would if you had a full bar graph. What if I strapped that bar to your arm and forced you to look at it every single time you wanted to do anything, like go to the bathroom or go outside or anything? I bet that you'd probably be a little bit more attentive to that, and you'd also, at a certain serious level, start to realize that my freedom is linked to this bar graph somehow, right? But Zach, you might say, I already have a meter that tells me exactly how much freedom I have, and when it's empty, I have to go fill it up. Well, and to that, I say, can your gas tank, can it do this? My point is, this actually has a little bit of depth to it. I don't think Nintendo had this in mind when they were actually creating the game, but that's actually the beauty of it. These fake systems that we see in games, they represent real things. And they can also teach us real things about your and my real life. So does Super Mario Sunshine actually teach us how to save, budget, or anything useful? Well, let's play the game and find out. Super Mario Sunshine is Mario 64's successor in name, style, everything. And if you're like me and have a lot of experience in Super Mario 64, most of the controls will feel pretty similar with a few pretty big differences. First of all, you can't long jump, backflip, or crouch, which it kind of was a big deal for me. And even though I got used to it, there were still places, even in the final level, where I felt like if I just did the right inputs, I would be able to do a long jump, or I'd be able to do a backflip. I did get used to it though, and it really wasn't that big of a deal. Anyway, in Super Mario Sunshine, you gotta collect these little suns to move on. Collect enough, and you'll trigger a cutscene in the hub world that will oftentimes give you something new. Either a new ability or it'll unlock a new level. You need to beat Shadow Mario in each of these levels, and then finally you'll get onto the boss of the final game, Bowser. What's super cool about this game is that the pacing is actually really similar to Tears of the Kingdom. You have a main objective, but as you progress, you're subtly turned away towards something shiny, and you kind of instinctively go towards that shiny thing. I remember an interview with the game devs of Tears of the Kingdom a long time ago, and I remember how they talked about how important it was for them to get the perfect exploration kind of ideal down in Tears of the Kingdom. It stuck with me, and well, when I'm playing this game, Super Mario Sunshine, I'm realizing that, well, they've been perfecting this kind of game loop for literal decades and across many different game series. When I played Super Mario Sunshine, I think that I unlocked every single level before I beat Shadow Mario in a single one of those levels, which means I didn't collect that many shines. All I was doing was just kept getting distracted by all these shiny things. And this really highlights the similarities between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, this is exactly the same gameplay loop that they have you doing there. And I mean, also, come on, look at this bird thing. I mean, is this not just the wind beast from Breath of the Wild? I mean, come on, what are we doing? We're getting a little off track. 7 levels and 7 shines to collect in each level before we can finally call a level done. There's a couple more, but for the sake of it, 7 times 7, that's 49, plus 1 shine that you get at the very beginning when you're on the airstrip, that's 50 before you can get to the final level and finally beat up Bowser. This is significantly less than any of the other 3D Mario games, like by a lot. But one thing that you might not be taking into account is that this game is really hard. Like, holy smokes, the GameCube was truly the era of the hardcore gamers. I mean, Melee is hard, Sunshine is hard. I haven't played Wind Waker, I probably should, but that game, I bet, is probably pretty hard. As you play through Sunshine, you get frustrated, and most of the time you actually do end up getting better at the game. Your jumps feel a little bit more fluid, your character moves where you expect him to go. You can get to places that you thought initially were completely out of your reach. In nailing the movement, it just feels so good when you get it right. That said, a lot of the difficulty curve is artificial. The controls, they don't really need to be as clunky as they are in order to get the same freedom of movement. On top of that, while a lot of the environment is placed to help you, nearly just as much of the environment is placed to try to kill you. I think I fell just straight clipped through the floor on multiple occasions, and I had to just kind of sit back and laugh because, like, what am I learning when Mario just clips through the floor? I mean, nothing really, right? I'm learning nothing. I can't avoid this next time. I can't not walk on the ground. I have to stand somewhere, and sometimes I just fall through the floor. And this leads us to the next two insights that we can learn when we're playing Super Mario Sunshine. The first being perseverance is real and has a real return. And second, well, sometimes life just sucks. So about the first thing, Sunshine really rewards us when we understand how to move Mario. There are so many frustrating levels that start off feeling nearly impossible, but with enough real attempts that you spend actually trying to understand the mechanics, how Mario moves, how does he interact with this wall, and not just jumping and praying, you'll get to the end nearly every single time. I don't think that there's a single hard section of this game that I couldn't now get in like 1 to 2 tries at this point. And these sections, when I first started, took like 30 to 50 tries even when I was first going at them. But that's the thing. As we learn how these systems work, we understand things about them. And once we've understood things about how these systems work, we can, with relative confidence, navigate these difficult waters again and again pretty safely. This is not foolproof, however. Sometimes you just clip through the floor anyway. And this is a hard but important lesson to learn on the way as well. I mean, you might be the best Super Mario Sunshine parkourer or like really good at impressing your friends when they come over after school to go play GameCube with you. But I bet if this was you, sometimes you just clip through the floor anyway. And while that's a little embarrassing, that's life. It's important to learn. The message in Super Mario Sunshine is, albeit a bit lacking. The characters are bland, with one exception that I can't wait to talk about next week, are overall pretty uninteresting and don't really affect the gameplay experience at all. I don't think that there's a single dialogue box that you need to actually pay attention to. I could play this game in Japanese and just skip through all the dialogue boxes. It doesn't change how the game feels or plays at all. And honestly, maybe I just missed it, but where does Bowser Jr. even come from in this game? Like, is he supposed to be Shadow Mario this whole time? Or I mean, like, when does the game even tell us this if that's the case? If Shadow Mario is the culprit, then, I mean, like, out of nowhere, we get Bowser and Bowser Jr. and is, like, newly, Bowser Jr. just came from this game, by the way. I just want to point that out. He wasn't in any other games. He's just sitting in a jacuzzi with Peach, and then all of a sudden you have to take him out. And it's like, why are we doing this now? I feel like we were fighting Shadow Mario this whole time. I don't really understand that. All that said, I did really enjoy the fact that they added a voice line to Bowser. I thought that was pretty funny. I enjoyed that a lot. Anyway, after all of that, our trusty sidekick, the big budget analogy that we've been talking about this whole time, he dies right before our eyes. It is the only moment in this entire game that invokes any emotion at all in us, and it feels really awkward. I mean, like, even Mario seems completely unbothered by the fact that his trusty sidekick is dying, and as soon as he does die, I mean, he just goes off to see the sunset with Peach. So, I mean, I could stretch this into some weird lesson about how life is only for the living, and Mario knows that, but I'm not going to because, well, Flood doesn't actually die. We see him right afterwards. The Toads fixed him up, and he's now vacationing with us in the credits. So, again, we learn nothing. We still learn nothing. I get that not every game needs to have an uplifting or an encouraging story. I get that. But honestly, these failed attempts at sincerity in a storyline made me really realize how campy this game feels like at times. Like, there are places in Noki Bay where I genuinely feel like I'm playing abandonware. You know those little discs that used to come when you would buy like a motherboard or something like that? Games like Pajama Max or that Dog and Rabbit, the detective game. You guys know what I'm talking about? Anyway, I love it when games manage to create an image in my head that doesn't actually match what the game looks like in reality. It's so interesting. There are sections in this game that I would outright tell you, no matter how it looks, that it's gotta be a fan mod or something, but no, it's actually how it looks. I think this goes to show that you remember these little details more than you remember the things that aren't there. Like, our brains just kind of gloss over the sections that are not fully polished. Like, you might not see this little patch of grass at Noki Bay where there's no texture, no nothing, but you're gonna remember Mario when he like bounces when you stop moving, you know? Like, that's memorable. That's like a fun little thing, and that's what kind of brings the game life and makes it not... You don't notice that there's no texture here. One of my YouTube heroes, Annie Austin, often goes on and on about these interesting places in these games, and I love his perspectives on games. If you haven't checked him out, go check him out because it's really cool. I believe that games can be more than just time sinks. They often have valuable life lessons that can teach us something important about the world or ourselves. Not every game is made equal, however. So I've created a system that I think is pretty good at rating each game based on, well, what it could teach you in your real life. Like if the game can teach you something interesting, or if it is something novel, or something that a university professor might try to, but will come short of. The things that I'm taking into account of on this review will be problem solving, real life skills, empathy building, the message, and of course, enjoyability, because if it's not fun, well, what's the point? Each of these topics will contribute a weighted score that will make up the overall score that you can use to determine if this game actually has something that you can learn from it that's worth playing. With all of that said, here's a quick rundown on Super Mario Sunshine. If you want a bigger breakdown, please check out my Patreon. The actual report itself is free, but it's a great place to support me if you would like to do that. You can also subscribe if you'd like to do that. That would be great. Let's start with problem solving. So this is certainly present and apparent. Super Mario Sunshine is constantly offering you little puzzles and asking you, how do you do this? It doesn't give you strict confines, and it doesn't tell you the best way to do anything. Additionally, it's often the case that there are multiple correct answers. This leaves room for a lot of really creative problem solving, and it's a really, really fun practice for us as players to kind of jump into. Real life skills. So again, this is kind of the budget analogy, right? I think that there's something to be learned here, but it's not everything about this game, right? Like, I think that honestly, you might say that, well, Zach, this is a bit of a stretch, and I think that you're probably right. And that's why this is only getting a 2 out of a 3. I mean, look, the important things that get you ahead in life are not strapped to your back like a water tank in this Mario game. In this game, you're acutely aware at all times just how far you're allowed to go and just how much you're allowed to do because of the massive water tank and the little indicator that's constantly on your screen. If we were able to take any lesson from this game into the real world, it's that being aware of things that are moving you throughout the world is extremely important. Money, gas, your career, other opportunities. These are all incredibly important to be aware of and to constantly kind of keep checking. You need to be finding places to fill up your water tank so that you can keep moving forward. It's an obvious lesson if you think about it, but it's fundamental. If we can learn this at a young age, then I think it's pretty important for us. Next up is empathy building. So this gets a 0 out of 1. It's not present or apparent at all. And this is kind of going to be the theme for the next couple ones because, like I said, there's only really one awkward scene that makes us feel anything when Flood dies. But that's not even really that important because there's no consequence. And honestly, I'm going to say something that's probably pretty controversial, probably. But if Mario wasn't the main character, I think we probably would have already forgotten about this game already. I mean, the controls are fun. It's a kind of an interesting story, but the characters aren't they're memorable, and I mean, nothing about this game really invokes any empathy in us as players. Following up empathy, we got the message. And much like empathy, this is getting a 0 out of 2. Like I said before, the message is kind of confusing. It's completely optional, in my opinion, and it's just not really that enjoyable or memorable at all. So for that, it's going to get a 0. And finally, we got enjoyability. So this is 100% a 2 out of 2. Though I often got stuck in areas that I had to make multiple attempts at actually completing and trying to figure out the specific parkour mechanics, learning how the game worked and how I could parkour through a level was incredibly satisfying. I mean, Flood is just fun to use, and sliding around is just a total blast. There were a handful of puzzles that made this game really drag on, obviously, like the one in the casino, for example. But overall, everything is paced really well, and this game is incredibly fun to play all the way through to the very end. Overall, Super Mario Sunshine gets a 6 out of 10. So it's a great, fun game that does teach you, well, a few things. It's not the ultimate waste of time, but it's also not the ultimate example of a game that can impact your real life in a significant way. That said, a 6 out of 10 is really not that bad of a score for a game on this scale. What I'm trying to say here is that there is something to be learned here, and there's a lot of games out there that won't be able to earn a single point in any of these categories. So a 6 out of 10, it means that there's something to be learned here. I encourage you to go check out Super Mario Sunshine and play it again with this in mind, and maybe you learn something new. This has been a project that I've been working on for a pretty long time now, and I'm finally feeling I'm in a good place to actually actualize it. So I'd love to get your feedback on what this whole thing is. Maybe you have some ideas for how this rating scale can be improved. Maybe you have some games that you'd like me to consider. Either way, I would love to hear from you. You can check me out on so many different places. I mean, I think I have all my links in the description below. I got Discord, I got Twitter, I got, well, even just leave a comment. Please come check it out. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this and you thought this was cool, I would love for you to check out the Star Fox video that I released last week. This is a video about how Star Fox might be able to teach you decision making, and I think that it's, well, like I said, if you like this one, you might like that one as well. This has been Super Mario Sunshine is a budgeting tool. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.